Hey, this is Adam Brown, and this is a consumer package bonus episode shot remotely, which is a departure from our regular format. I had this next guest lined up to meet me in early May. We've had to delay multiple times due to things being shut down in NYC. I decided I didn't want to delay any further and risk losing a spot on his very busy schedule. So I decided to content definitely outweighed the format for sure. This episode is with AJ Vaynerchuk, the more handsome and better basketball player of the Vaynerchuk brothers. These are his words, not mine. I first met AJ back in January 2015. We hit it off from the jump. He's a very smart businessman, a highly intelligent human, and just an all-around good guy. He's run a major social digital agency, invested in a number of consumer-facing brands, and now sits atop a firm that manages NFL players. He has seen things from all angles and can definitely provide some awesome insights and nuggets for anyone watching or listening. So let's get into it. Welcome, AJ. It's good to have you.
Good to be here, Adam. Appreciate the kind words.
Of course. So I feel like the key here with a talk like this is to bring value to the audience through your story. So I thought I would just hit you with some questions that could add value to the audience, and I broke them out in stages of your life. So first, VaynerSports, that's what you're up to now. In your own words, what does VaynerSports actually do?
Yeah, so VaynerSports in many ways is a traditional athlete representation firm. As you mentioned, we represent NFL players. I think in the near future, we plan on expanding into other sports as well. But where we start to depart is not only do we take care of the contract negotiations on behalf of the player with the team that employs them, but we're also really focused on the human beyond the athlete, where we're also helping quite a bit in terms of off the field, education and exposure to the world of business, exposure to our network, personal branding, content, endorsements. And so really we take something that is typically actually split. A lot of times athletes have their agent, but then they also have a marketing rep. We combine both of those things under one roof and really bring a ton of value in a different manner.
Got it. And I've had the pleasure of working with you and some of your athletes. I've seen it firsthand, and I think you definitely walk the walk and back up what you just said. All right. So in assessing athletes, are there any personal characteristics, not on the field, but personal characteristics they must or must not have?
Well, I'll start with the must not. It's a little bit easier. I think something that's important to us is having the right type of human. And so there are certain things that we do not gravitate towards. And I think it centers around personal character and moral compass around things like serious crimes. So that's a big red flag for us. And then on the have, I think something that's important to us, it kind of lends to my first answer, is a desire beyond the sport. I think for us, it's a bit self-selecting in the sense that when we have a client that we work with, it's because we're gravitating towards their interests and their ability off the field, and they gravitate towards us because they see that we can actually help them with that endeavor.
Got it. Makes sense. Okay. When looking at brand deals for your players, what is the most important thing you look for?
The most important thing from a brand deal, I think, is authentic fit. And listen, I'm not going to be fake here. We definitely have looked at and explored and done deals that maybe weren't the most authentic of all time to the player, but financially it made sense, right? And there's going to be that instance where doing business is doing business. But I think what we're most energized by and what we seek the most often is actually finding a brand that not only has finances to pay the player, but it's something that the player actually gravitates towards and authentically likes and would use him or herself. So I think that's a part of it.
Yeah, it makes sense. Obviously, there's a lot of pairings you see that make no sense at all, and it looks like just chasing money.
And listen, like I said, we've done that before, and we will always, because sometimes a deal financially makes too much sense, and it's okay. Like, I don't think when it comes to branding and endorsements, I think the number one priority should be taking care of yourself and your family, and then because of that, there may be a scattered percentage of deals that you are more financially driven than other things. And that's okay.
Totally.
It depends on the stage of your career.
Totally. And I think that tees up my next question, right? Like, where do you think brands blow it when it comes to sponsorships or collaborations? Like, how could they formulate them better to actually have it fit the player better?
Yeah, I think probably the most common miss is relying a little bit too much on name equity and leaving it there. And so just going to the AA list, plenty of brands doing endorsements with athletes that are AA list, but a lot of the AA list athletes just don't want to do endorsements because they're making 20, 30 million a year from playing the sport. Right. And so they're not financially incentivized enough. And so I think there's a lack of heart and soul in that work. And so I think, brands could do a better job of going a little bit more deep into each individual sport and each individual influencer bucket. And I think there's a sweet spot of maybe somebody isn't as far along in their career, but they're still a great, and future success is clear. But maybe they're a better fit and a little bit hungrier to work and actually want to be an endorsee.
Yeah, and it kind of fits with like the VaynerMedia philosophy of like value, right? So like you're overpaying for a marquee name, you're going to get very little input from them. If you go to the up and comer, which you guys will know, you'll know who's a rock star and who over indexes and can place and would do more because they're at that place as opposed to the big name. And so I would imagine you guys would probably help people navigate that better than other agencies.
Yeah, that's our belief too and our goal.
Makes sense. All right, bonus. I'm a lifelong Jet fan as well. I'm just curious on the spot, favorite offense and defense player of all time. Go.
Oh, good. Keyshawn Johnson on offense. And I think a part of that had to do with the age at which he came through. When he was drafted to the Jets, I was 9 years old, and he was the #1 pick. He had a big personality and charisma.
So good.
And so, I think there's actually other players that I like better for their contributions. Curtis Martin, Wayne Corbett, DeBrickashaw Ferguson. But I think from an emotional chord, based on my age when it all went down, Keyshawn sits there for me.
Okay.
And then on defense, it's funny. There's a few. I'm going to give it to Darrelle Revis. And even though Darrelle broke my heart and I honestly, as an athlete advocate, he's a genius in terms of the leverage that he was able to create and the hand that he forced the Jets. But as a pure fan, it definitely hurt when he won a Super Bowl with the Patriots. But he is the best player at the year that he had in 2009 when he should have won the defensive MVP. Is the single greatest season performance by a Jet player of my life, bar none.
Totally agree. Yeah, I was actually going to say, for me, it's probably Wayne Corbett and Curtis Martin. Just like my time when I went to games, when I had the dollars to even go to games, I still have a Curtis Martin jersey. These are guys that as personality traits, like they left it all on the field. And then Revis, and I went to Michigan, so I had Charles Woodson was right when I was there. So it was the same deal, like shutdown corner, guy could play any position, and like his couple year run at Michigan was complete shutdown of a side of the field. So I just think cornerback's my favorite position in the game.
And I'm 90% sure Woodson was the player that won the defensive MVP the year that I thought Revis should have. And and by the way, Woodson had a ridiculous year.
Right.
I think he had 9, 10, or 11 interceptions, which was a major driver for him winning it.
More balls thrown his way.
Yeah, and also he's a ball hawk. But you're right. Revis just didn't see the ball.
Totally.
And also the nature of a corner. And Woodson at that part of his career was playing safety.
Right.
So he was able to kind of freelance a little bit more. But so that was a fun year for you. Your two of your favorite players just being ridiculous in 2009.
Yeah, and you talk about Revis breaking your heart after. It's funny because I was in school with Tom Brady, and I spent time with Tom Brady. I played darts with him, and he's a GOAT, and he plays for the Patriots. So I love him, and then he rolls in, and you hate him, and it's it's a tough one. So you'll probably have more of those in your life, and now that you're in this.
Did you want Drew Henson or Tom Brady to start when you were in school?
I mean, I didn't love Drew Henson, right? He came in, he had the Yankee contract. We had Derek Jeter my freshman year. He stayed for a week, and then he left, and they won a World Series, and that was so. I don't know. I never got to hook my hook into Henson.
Fair enough.
All right, let's pivot. Investing.
Yeah.
So when you look to invest in an early stage brand, what do you look for in the business and the founder?
You just so to that point, it starts with the founder. That's how I drive a lot of my decisions, I think. And that's not how I always did it. I think when I was younger and more early on, I just got so excited by the ideas. And I naively and optimistically just assumed that the founder who had this idea could then go execute the idea and that they would figure it out kind of in the same way my brother and I just figured things out, right? And that was a misstep. So first and foremost, it's the founder. And within the founder, it's from my time spent with them. Do they have the ability to lead? Do they have the gut to get through the hard times? Do they have the ability to raise the capital necessary? Do they have the ability to hire the right people and maintain the right people? That's just massive. And then secondarily is, do I like the idea? Do I think there's a market for it? Do I think it's differentiated and innovative? I think that's big for me. I struggle, and I probably miss on a lot of great businesses that don't really disrupt or innovate or change, I gravitate towards something that's really drastically improving something that already exists or is creating something brand new.
Got it. Makes sense. Any brand that surprised you or any business that surprised you and crush it more than anticipated? Like you took a flyer, you weren't sure, and then it just like outperformed.
Oh, that's a good one. That's hard. You know, it's probably, I don't know if it's anything that I've invested in because I wouldn't have invested if I didn't think they could be that successful. I'll go towards more of the things that I missed on. I would say, actually, here, you know what? Here's a compromise. This is something that I missed on initially. Gary and I missed on initially, but then we came back and invested later. Uber, which I was always so confident in. I just didn't see the 9 chess moves to getting to be this big. You know, I thought it was going to be a big company. I thought it could be $1 billion company. But I mean, they've exceeded those expectations by quite a bit. So that's a good one.
Right. And I think, but that if you think about it now, right, like that checked your boxes. You guys knew the jockey. The jockey was super smart. It was definitely disruptive. And the concept made a lot of sense. I think you were the first ride in New York. Is that right?
Yeah, it's a good brag for me.
That's awesome. So you stole my third question, but you're keeping us ahead of pace. So I appreciate you for that.
Third question.
Yeah.
Right.
My bonus question in this area is, how is it working with Steve Ross? Or like, what have you gotten from Steve Ross in your life? You know, as a Michigan guy, I'm a big fan.
Yeah.
Any take on him?
You know, these days, my exposure to Steve is less, just because when I left VaynerX, you know, I left the day-to-day operations of that, and that's where a lot of our time and energy was spent together from time to time. And then I also created a conflict, right? He's the owner of the Miami Dolphins. And so what I do for a career, he actually can't be involved with. So, you know, Steve and I spent more time together, and I learned more from him from, you know, the mid to late teens, I don't know, 2010s, whatever you want to call them. But probably the single biggest thing that I got from Steve that I really like is when we were doing our deal, it was so important to him that we felt really great about the deal. Because what he said was, and I take this, we were on the other side. You know, usually I'm on the side of the table of Steve where I'm investing or I'm buying something or I'm hiring somebody, right? But this was on the other side. And what he told me was like, listen, the worst thing that can happen when I do this deal with you guys is if in a year or two you look back at it and you have regret and you resent the deal, because I'm doing this deal so that we can do business together for decades, not to win on this short-term one-off transaction. And so that's always been important to me, is that when I'm doing something from his seat at the table, I want to make sure that the person on the other side really understands and values what's happening in that moment, because if they regret it or resent it a year or two later, it's not worth it.
Totally. Great. And I had a feeling of late, you probably don't deal with him and can't talk much about him. So it was more just like,
you know, he's super busy, obviously.
Sure.
I see him at the Super Bowl. I
Right.
see him, you know, he invites me to the holiday party. I see him once or twice a year. Gary sees him a ton more because obviously Gary's still running VaynerX day to day.
Makes sense. All right, let's pivot over to VaynerMedia. So what was it like in the really early days of the agency? Like, how would you, if you had to just like summarize it and characterize it in a couple of sentences, what would you say?
Controlled chaos in the Wild Wild West.
All right, let's move on.
It was 2 people, my brother and myself, running an advertising agency with 0 days of advertising agency experience in any capacity. I didn't even intern at an advertising agency in college, right? Social media as an industry becoming this explosive, massive industry in a very short order. And it was our focus, right? So you've got people that were figuring it out as they went, and you had corporations trying to figure out social media as they went. And that convergence together created a lot of crazy, majestic times.
I bet. Yeah, and I think we have a lot of, you know, you and I first met in 2015. I think I met Gary in 2014. We met for like coffee by on the Upper East Side.
Yep.
And like right in, he's like, just tell me about you, your family, everything. And as I started rattling things off, he was like, you know, so I worked with, at that time, prior to getting in this business, in the social media business, I had a brother 9 years older. I know you guys are 11 years.
Yeah, right.
Worked with him. I was the younger, obviously better. You know, and working with him, learning that dynamic, how does that play out, pivoted out of that business, went in the mortgage industry, worked in a conference room of Ripco, which is one of my clients, a big commercial real estate company in the city, where I just like worked by myself. Then it was 2, then it was 6, then it was 8, and then, and like the narrative was like such a parallel. And then I came into the Vayner offices. I had like 8 minutes with him, and then he's like, "You got to meet AJ." Because I think you guys are more like the younger buck coming up. You guys will have your vantage point, you're pivoting, whatever. And then we had our meeting, we hit it off, and we actually started late. We had 30 minutes on the calendar. It was late for some reason. We ended up having 20. I left, I went around the corner, and I was like, man, I feel like that was too quick. You're like, you're right. Let's get back in here. And we got back in here. Yeah. And you actually set me on my path to change my fee structure. You gave me like just great ops stuff that I changed immediately, and it's been game changer. I don't know if I ever told you that.
No, I didn't know that. But that's awesome.
Yeah, it was really helpful. So awesome. I owe you like some sort of commission check at some point. So, all right. So number 2, you worked with major CPG brands. I think you even bagged some of the big players early on that had a lot of traditional spend, zero social. So how'd you get them on board?
It was a process. But I got to give credit. There was a few people that really saw the vision, and they knew that the budgets were small, but their idea was, let's grow together, right? Help educate me and my team. And if we see the results, we'll unlock bigger budgets. And so, great examples of that is Bon and Bao, when he was at PepsiCo at the time. He was the key individual to bring us in and get us our first project, and really was a what's the right word? Like a consigliere? Is that a good word for it? I don't even know. Basically,
he's a believer.
Yeah, he believed in us, and he also helped us navigate the politics of Pepsi. And he was an advocate and a champion for us, and introduced us to brands. And he just believed in what we were doing, and he was big for us in that regard. Another individual was a gentleman named Carl Johnson, who at the time in like 2010 was the chief strategic officer of Campbell's. And so those two are good examples. And then, of course, actually another great example, and I'm glad I'm bringing it up because he would have yelled at me if I didn't, is Matt Higgins, who took a bet on us when he was the president of the New York Jets. And then ultimately, when he went to go partner with Steve Ross and become the CEO of RSE Ventures, led the way to acquire a minority interest in the company because of that. So those 3 in particular are good examples where we were able to bag some really big brand names, right? An NFL team, PepsiCo, one of the biggest beverage companies in the entire world, Campbell Soup, another massive CPG. And it required individuals that believed in the general vision. And then we collaborated together to do case studies, to put wins on the board, to then grow budgets through success. It was meritocracy. If we didn't do great work, we would have never grown. And they told us that, and we knew that. And so through just relationship and case studies and success, we were able to grow from there.
Right. And I hear your brothers say a lot, like, I don't sell the unsellable, but I would imagine in the beginning that was not on the table. Early stage, you have to be selling pretty much everyone.
Yes, but it wasn't unsellable because even if people didn't believe, they at least believed it was a fad and they couldn't ignore it, right? And so what we went in with was we were finding ways to sell something that you couldn't pass on because you wouldn't be doing your due diligence. So for example, the way we got a lot of Campbell's brands on board is we scared the shit out of them. We would walk into the boardroom with senior brand managers, and Carl would be in the room with us, and we would post a picture of a brand and their Facebook page, and it was one of their brands, whether it was V8 or Chunky Soup or whatever, and we'd say, see this? You guys have a Facebook fan page, and you didn't even know it. And it has 125,000 followers or fans that are getting, and this is when Facebook organic was popping. You had 125,000 fans, like 93,000 people saw your status update, right?
Totally.
And we said, hey, this has a V8 logo. It says it is facebook.com/pages/V8. And every person on that 125,000 believes this is you. It's not you, because none of you know what I'm talking about. And let me show you a recent status update that features curse words and maybe a grotesque image. And because it's some 13-year-old kid having fun pretending he's V8, right?
Right.
And so our first project with Campbell's was working with the brands to basically work with Facebook to take control of their intellectual property and their trademark, and to clean up the page and start creating content and engaging with consumers. There was customers going on the V8 Facebook fan page saying, hey, I just bought a bottle of V8 and there was a bug in my bottle. And the V8 fan page that wasn't controlled by them would laugh at the comment, be like, ha, 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 ha. That's
Right.
not what VA wants.
No.
And then we worked with them to hook that up to customer support. And so that the next time somebody had an issue with a bottle, Campbell's customer support was actually answering that issue.
Right. So it's most like showing them how to control the narrative, that the narrative was being controlled for them. And it was like selling them that way that they could not do it.
Exactly.
I guess that's interesting because I did that. I would do similar things, but I started so small. Did you guys start right from the jump, say we're going to go after big players like that? And that was your model?
That we had was Gary's network. If it was just me as a 22-year-old kid at school, I could have never, right? But Gary already having a 10 plus year career of success. And the thing that we kind of tripped into that was not tripped into, that's not fair to Gary. A circumstance that we were lucky about was because Gary's first act of his career was in the world of wine and in New York and New Jersey, he had relationships. His best customers were C-suite executives at major corporations. And so we were able to get meetings because Gary had C-suite relationships that were spending big money on big wine with him for years. And so because Gary was in an industry that had a higher end clientele, and by the way, New York and New Jersey is an unbelievable epicenter of CPG, right? Totally. So because my dad moved to New Jersey when we were coming to America, and because he started in that business, we actually had this really crazy pipeline to C-suite executives through that.
Yeah, I never even thought about that angle. And I know people, you know, and podcasts talk about like luck versus hard work, and
it's
so much of it.
Right? My brother and my father, my brother in the example of Vayner, he had to work unbelievably hard to do amazingly. But if my family business was like landscaping or construction, maybe we don't have Fortune 500 C-suite executive relationships.
Totally. Crazy.
That's the component.
So
and then by the way, also to Gary's credit, at that same time, he was also building a big personal brand and was speaking on stage. So we were also getting clients from that too. So it's both.
That makes sense. And I guess I don't know the timing, but had he already invested in Facebook? And like when you started, you already had a relationship at the top of Facebook. It wasn't like
Gary did. I didn't, you know, because when he invested in Facebook, I was a sophomore in college.
Right.
So I didn't have any money or juice, but yeah, we had that too. And that's a credit to, you know, hard work and vision on Gary's part. And again, I'm always mindful of the fact as a co-founder, you know, some like a couple questions I get asked sometimes, like, how do I find a good co-founder? I'm like, you're asking the wrong fucking guy. I was born into one, right? Like, so that I'm the wrong guy to ask that. And then two, you know, to that point, like I started my career on second and a half base, right? Because I had an older brother, business partner and mentor who opened up so many doors for the sales process to C-suite executives, both between his relationships from Wine Library and his public speaking. I was more focused on just the operational part of making this thing run.
Right. Yeah, man. Such a parallel. I mean, I graduated during the dot-com boom, did a couple years in the city, 99, 2000, you know, sold first pay-per-click on goto.com, which probably even predates you. You probably don't heard of it. And then my brother brought me into the mortgage business, and it's one of those things, like everything in your journey, like sets you up for the next, like not without getting like kumbaya and like secret, but like I was a confident, pretty cocky salesperson and persona coming out of college, but I never banked those years, like working on Long Island in the mortgage industry, that was like ninja level training in sales and understanding people. I wouldn't be where I am today. So it's such an interesting parallel. And so in that sense, he put me on second base. But that's a perfect example. Not much of that career carried over with me into now this. Mm-hmm. So I started from scratch, but I had the sales background. So it took me years to even get someone at Facebook senior enough to be like, oh, you guys spend a lot. Now we'll work with you. And you guys had that from the jump. It's a huge advantage. That's amazing. So what was it like to leave abruptly?
Well, it wasn't so abrupt in the sense that I actually talked to Gary about my departure, and we mapped out my departure 12 months before I actually left.
Okay.
So that was important to me, right? I didn't want to leave Gary high and dry. I wasn't going to just come in, say I'm out, and 2 weeks later be out, right? Like I spent a ton of time and energy and planning for the sake of making sure that when I left, I replaced myself as much as possible through just a series of actions. So that was a big part of it. But then in terms of leaving, It was a real self journey in that regard, right? I think the thing that when I left that was most important to me was I didn't want to know what was next. My personality was always to know what was next, right? I always knew that I was going, like, I was very on top of getting into college. And so most of my senior year, I was already accepted and knowing I was going to BU and things like that. Gary and I spent essentially my entire senior year of college mapping out what would then become VaynerMedia. And we actually started VaynerMedia 6 weeks before I even graduated and had a client. So there was zero lag time between college and first act of my career. And so the number one goal that I had going into my departure in May 2016 was to not know. And that was actually, it was flattering. It was tough. I had so many people saying, like, let's have coffee. Like, do you want to do something? Like, I had like people just asking me to do something. I'm like, I'm not taking any meetings. I'm not talking to anybody. I need to like unplug and get a really clear mind, and then I'll see what's next. So that it was a really great cathartic experience. I left in May. I essentially the original plan was to take a year off. I guess part of me didn't allow that. I was actually back in the saddle by Labor Day. But I did take 4 months off, and it was awesome. And really
Off.
good reset. Off.
Wow.
I mean, the occasional call here and there with an investment,
But
a passive investment, but man, like not checking my inbox for an entire day was a thing. And that just
how was that?
cathartic.
I bet.
Yeah.
I bet.
Yeah.
All right. And just going back to the dynamic, like 11 years difference, working with each other, obviously both really high, intense, type A personalities. How would you summarize the relationship? Not life relationship, but like during the VaynerMedia days, in a couple sentences.
Honestly, as smooth as you could ever imagine. And even if it's hard to believe, it's the truth from the perspective of the number one reason I think it really worked well for Gary and I was 2 things. So I said the number one reason was 2 things. Number 1 and 2 reason it worked really well. Number 1, we're 95% the same person, but 5% different. And that 5% different is complementary, not adversarial. And so, a key distinction is the idea that I'm a much more private person than he is, right? Like even doing this is kind of not so common for me, right? It's become more common lately because I've embraced it more within my role as a sports agent and as a CEO. But in general, it's not necessarily my inclination. Whereas Gary loves being on stage and interacting with people and things of that nature. That really helped because if we both had that DNA, I think we would butt heads a little bit more. And because we're 95% the same on so much, we get to solutions and answers very quickly. There's not a lot of tug and pull and back and forth on one another. And then the second piece, what made it so great was I think that 11-year age gap was important. And it made it very clear who was the CEO and who was the COO, who was A and who was B. And I had respect for the fact that my brother was 11 years my senior, already had a decade plus as a successful businessman and entrepreneur, and that I wanted to learn from him, and he was my mentor. And so by having a very clear difference and delineation between CEO and COO, that helped quite a bit, I think.
That's great. I mean, that's so key. You mentioned before about people's like, how do I find my co-founder? And it's like, they try to force it and like, I'm an A, you're a B, we will fit. Yeah. It's like, it's not always the case.
I don't have a good answer for that because my co-founder, was my brother. So
yeah, it makes sense. All right. So just, we talked about Crohn's before, and I don't want to go like super deep into it, but like, how is it living with Crohn's? Like, are you getting by? Are you managing it?
Yeah, I'm doing very well right now, frankly. I think, Crohn's is a disease that does not currently have a cure. So that's tough psychologically, right? I have a disease that there is no cure for. That stinks. And so the framework in which I kind of look at my Crohn's is, one, I put it in perspective. There's way worse diseases to have, right? So there's not I'm well past the woe is me. Sure, the first few months there was woe is me, but I moved on from it quickly, and I think that's important. The other piece of it too is I was very fortunate to have, I had a pretty serious case. At one point in like 2012, I think it was, or maybe 2013, I went to the ER 4 times in the span of 12 months. So it was serious, and I had real issues. And so I had surgery, I want to say maybe 7 years ago, that removed a part of my large and small intestine. And since I've had that surgery, I've not been in the ER once. And so that was a massive win for me. And then just getting better every day, every week, every year of understanding my body and what foods I respond well to and what foods I don't, and things of that nature. So I'm doing well. I'm getting by for sure.
Good. I'm happy to hear it. Do you think the NFL is going to pull off a full season this year?
Yes, I do. But I am not 1000% confident in that answer. But my inclination is, if I choose yes or no, the answer is yes.
Will there be fans in stadiums?
I think that's less likely.
Odds makers.
It won't be full stadiums. That's for damn sure.
So just limited audiences spread out.
At best.
Right. Odds makers have the Jets over under this year. It wins. It's 6.5. Are you over or under?
No comment. I can't.
You just don't?
I can't. I want them to be over. That's my answer.
Okay. Actually, let me ask, this was not on my question list, but a question like, I'm a Jets fan, Knicks fan, Mets fan, Islanders fan, right? So do you believe, born into a fan, you have to remain that fan for life, otherwise you are not a real fan? Or if you fundamentally disagree with the Wilpons, if you don't like anything that happens at the Knicks organization, if you've been brutalized by the Jets your whole life, can you switch to another team, even if it's a hometown team? Can you go to become a Giants fan? What's your rule on that?
Case by case. There's subtleties to that. Personally, I'll never change, but that's me. Not everybody has to be me. I think that, I don't think you have to be the same fan forever, but I think if you can only get one switch, in my opinion. And
one switch.
Maybe two, maybe one switch for every 50 years or some shit like that. But like, I can't stomach I'm a Jets fan until I was 12, and then I was a Patriots fan, and now I'm a Chiefs fan. Like, I can't stomach that. That doesn't work for me. One thing that I think is really common amongst younger folk, it makes me sound old, but it's true, is at least in basketball, especially player-based, and I'm fine with that. If you're a Kobe, if you're a LeBron, if you're a young, like whatever, but then you got to roll with that player. I'm not comfortable with you being, LeBron and then switching to Giannis and then switching to Luka. Like, you got to roll if you're going to roll, kind of thing.
Right.
And maybe you can change once if your player retires, then maybe I'm okay if you pick a new player. So if you were the Tim Duncan guy or girl, like, and now you're all about Anthony Davis, fine. But I want you to roll with Anthony Davis until he's done bouncing the ball.
Got it.
How I look at it.
Can you be a Spurs fan and love Kawhi and then still respect Kawhi and be a fan of his when he leaves and still be a Spurs fan? Or is it once they leave, they're out and it's like team front of jersey first?
You can front of jersey first, but you can still like Kawhi and hope Kawhi does well. But you better, when the Clippers come to town, you better be on the Spurs side.
Fair.
First and foremost.
Fair. Last question. Patrick Ewing, overrated or underrated player?
Underrated by a wide margin.
And non-New York fans would agree with that, you think? Should agree with that?
They should agree with it. Whether they do or don't, I don't know. I don't care.
Doesn't matter.
All I'll say is look at the supporting cast that Patrick Ewing carried throughout his career. I think he was let down by management his entire career.
Pretty much. All right, man. So this was great. I really appreciate it. A lot on you. Put you in the hot seat. You were ready, as I would have anticipated. Where can viewers or listeners find you?
I'm primarily on Instagram and then Twitter, and it's just AJV, those 3 letters on both platforms. I got in early and got a good one.
Perfect. All right. So thanks for being here and for always being a great collaborator. I appreciate you. Thanks so much, man.